I would say to be relentless in all aspects of what you're doing. And I think that I'm really testing this right now for myself with this tech company because 3 years in, and we just went revenue positive with our MVP like a couple months ago. So there were, I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I wanted to quit and I was on the floor in a ball crying, I can't do this. What was I thinking? Who the hell am I to start a tech company? Like, what in the world is wrong with my brain? But then there was this other side of me that's like, you decided you're going to do this, get up. And I think that's just the way you have to be.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Erica Kinnebrew, and Erica, as a quick introduction, wanted to go to college or went to college, but didn't necessarily graduate. Had a daughter, went back and then graduated and got a master's and worked in special education for a period of time. Learned about applied behavioral analysis for a friend, and then also got connected with a guy that was into teaching that, and then went and got I think a postmaster's degree or master's and postmaster's degree. Moved to Maryland and opened up her own company, and then branched into Virginia, and then moved to Florida and opened a branch there, and then sold off different parts of the business and different locations, and then ran it and grew in other locations, and then finally did an exit before starting a tech company, as well as doing some consulting with tech companies. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Erica.
Awesome. That was quite the introduction. Thank you, Devin. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So I just took and condensed a much longer journey into the 30-second version of it. So why don't we rewind a bit and unpack it a bit more and tell us a little bit about how your journey got started going off to college?
Sure. So I always thought that I was going to do psychology. I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. I wanted to counsel and help people. And so my career path started with psychology, and then my trajectory was going to be all the way through to PhD in clinical psych. Like you said, I had my daughter the semester before I was set to graduate with my bachelor's degree. So I kept going. I graduated with my bachelor's degree in psychology, but then I took a little bit of time off. And in that time off, a pivot happened in my life. And so then when I went back and got my master's degree, I did it in special ed, Florida State, go Noles. So did emotional disturbances and learning disabilities. That was my master's.
So now you went, so you went into special ed, and was that, you say that was kind of where, you say it's kind of psychology or wanting to be a psychologist, and kind of what pushed you in the direction of special education?
So I started teaching at the private school my daughter went to, and was doing also educational therapy on the side. And I had some children who had special needs that I really wasn't as equipped as I needed to be to progress them through and teach them what they needed to teach, what they needed to learn. And so that's why I shifted, because I thought, you know what, I actually like the teaching side of this. So I'm going to go back to school, get my master's in education, and teach. And of course, that was just my first shift. I went through several shifts. But so then the trajectory was, all right, well, I'm going to get the skill set that I need so that I can work with these children better. And then my husband joined the Army, and that moved us from Florida to Monterey, California. And that's where I had a friend who had a child with autism, and she was receiving ABA therapy. And so that was kind of my first exposure to, which is funny because I got my undergrad degree was in psychology. I learned about behavior therapy. I learned about, Pavlov and kind of early, that's classical conditioning, but that's part of it. And so I had a little bit of knowledge, but I never really had seen it in practice and didn't really understand the power of it. And so then that kicked off my second pivot.
So now, and so you got into, now for those of the people, and I'm in the same camp, that aren't quite as aware. So you got into a bit of a applied, if I cannot get tongue tied, behavioral analysis and, therapy and those type of things. What is it, or kind of, how did you get into what is it, and kind of what pushed in that direction?
Yeah. So I was at my friend's house, and she had her therapist, her son's therapist was there working with him and teaching him, but it wasn't like I had learned in my master's in education. It was like a cross between therapy and education. But there were very specific ways that she handled things. And I thought, and then she got these results. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is this magic that's happening? How do you know to do this? Why did you choose? And I just started asking her all these questions. So applied behavior analysis is just very simply, it's the science of why we do what we do and how can we put things in place to change our behavior, other people's behavior. There's actually a science behind it. It's kind of crazy. It's cool, but it can be applied to anything. Smoking cessation, weight loss, any increase in skills. If a child isn't talking, you could apply the science to be more impactful in helping them to learn language. So just a litany of things it can help. It's pretty powerful.
So now, so you saw that in action, learned about it more, so connected up with the guy who was teaching it. Now, and I think you also went back to get a postmaster's in that, with that focus. Is that right?
That's right. Yep. Yeah, I met with the owner of the company, and at that point, so this is a behavioral therapy, so insurance covers this, but at this point, the only insurance that covered this was TRICARE. It wasn't covered. So military members had access to this. Actually, my friend, her husband joined the military solely so her child could receive this service. It was crazy because it's incredibly expensive. It's very comprehensive. Very, back in, I guess this was like in 2007. 2008. So, early, this field is still pretty young, but early when it was just TRICARE, or if you were very wealthy, you could fly behavior analysts. BCBAs is what they were called, board certified behavior analysts. We have a credentialing board, and families could fly them wherever to kind of set a program up and put the support in place. And then fast forward to now, all 50 states mandate insurance coverage for this therapy for children with autism, and all Medicaids cover it. So, totally forgot your question.
No, that you're good. No, just was there talking a little bit about how you went to get the postmasters in it. So now you go and you get that additional information, you get that additional training, and otherwise learn more about it. And then I think you went about setting up different clinics or different places where people could get the therapy and get assistance, and you did different locations. So maybe walks a little bit through that part of the journey.
Sure. So yeah, my husband was stationed in Tennessee. So we moved from Maryland to Tennessee, and the man that I met in California, I said Maryland to Tennessee, sorry, California to Tennessee. I don't even know where, we've been all over. Anyways, the man I met in California was looking to open up another location, and we were moving to the Fort Campbell area and just outside of Nashville, Clarksville, Tennessee. Anyway, so I opened up his center there in Nashville. And then 2 years later, my husband was transferred to Maryland. And so when we made that shift, I opened my own company in Maryland.
So now, you started doing it in Maryland, started doing a few locations, and I think you quickly expanded to a few additional locations, and kind of walk us through kind of, how did you decide the locations and how did you expand? And I mean, because in that sense, you talked about it was early on and it wasn't necessarily as well known and wasn't covered by a lot of insurances. So how did you go about kind of building a practice or whatever you want to call it, building a business around providing that service and letting people know about it and getting clients and getting people to do it in the various locations?
Yeah. So early, it was literally, I didn't do any market analysis other than, is there a military base nearby? That was it. So we opened in Maryland, multiple military bases, and then branched down into the Richmond, Virginia area again. Fort Lee is down there just south of Virginia. And we didn't go into Norfolk. There's a lot of military bases out there, but we were just in the Richmond area. And then, yeah, I moved to Florida, Pensacola, Gulf Breeze area. And at this point, state starting, as soon as I moved, coverage start, or not as soon as I moved, but like, well, right after I moved, Maryland mandated coverage. But prior to that, it had been picking up. And so there was quite the grassroots effort to push that across the United States. It was pretty impactful and impressive in the amount of time that it was done. So I didn't know how to do market analysis. I don't even know that I knew what it was when I started. I was just like, this is kind of how I do all things in life. I'm like, oh, look at that clip. Let's jump off and see what happens. And then, it would have been nice if I had had some of these skill sets that I have now when I started. I think I could have saved myself some headaches, and market analysis is definitely one of them. Now, if I were to open up a center somewhere, I would look at, what's the potential market, what's the population, what insurances, big companies that have insurance in this area. Are there other providers providing this service? How do I differentiate myself from them? So I would, I'd look at that now, but back then I was just like,
hey, you learn things along the way. You get additional experience, and definitely makes sense how you started. And it seems like it was just a bit of, hey, I know that military bases will cover that. What are the areas that have good military bases with a good size of people, and we'll start there, and then build a practice around that. And sounds like it was a good way to get the business started and to continue to grow it. And so now, kind of give us an idea over kind of what period of time did you grow? Because I think at one point you did branches in Maryland and Virginia, and then moved down to Florida, and then at one point you started to kind of sell some of the parts of the business and other locations and ran others, and kind of walk us through a little bit of that evolution.
Yeah, sure. So, yep, Maryland was my first, and it was my largest. So we had 7 different centers in Maryland. I branched into Virginia. We were just providing in-home services in Virginia. And then my family and I moved to Florida. So I started in Florida, and then at the same time, about the same time, same year, we moved to Florida. I also opened in northern Michigan. And then Michigan branched down into, like, we were the Traverse City northern area, and then branched down into the Ann Arbor area. And that was a separate company. So when I moved to Florida, we were still small in Maryland. So we were in home, and I opened the first 2 Maryland centers while I was in Florida. I had an incredibly awesome executive team up there. So we were able to do that, and we moved from in-home services to center services to 2 different locations. And my in-home in Virginia was struggling. My very good friend and kind of the market leader in that area, her husband was transferred, and I didn't have a leader to step up and oversee it. And at this point, our Maryland location was growing like gangbusters, and I had, in my infinite wisdom, decided to open a whole new company in northern Michigan. So I was like strapped with time. And we were having problems in Virginia, and I was uncomfortable with the level of services we were providing. And so I started reaching out to colleagues to see, because we had families and we had providers, and I didn't want to just rip the rug out from under them. So I was trying to see, like, will someone just pick this up? Like, I can't manage it right now. And that's how I ended up connecting with a family fund who actually had just opened in the Richmond area. And so they did, that was my first sale. It was an asset purchase, and just the Virginia location.
So now you sold off to Virginia. It makes sense, you know, if you're not able to be there, you're saying, hey, that's not representative of the brand, and we're not able to provide the level of service we want. And otherwise, you know, hey, maybe we'll hand it off to somebody that might be able to provide the you know, the time, money, effort, you know, or you know, attention, those type of things, all of the above, or whatnot, to the location. Then it makes sense. And so I think then you continue to, if I remember when we talked a little bit before, you continue to still run and grow the Maryland location for a period of time before kind of finally making a complete exit of the business. Is that right?
Yeah, so it was a little while before the complete exit, but yes, I kept Maryland, and at this point, Michigan is growing, Florida is growing, and I've also decided to open a back office company. So I had an admin team that was doing, you know, billing, contracting, credentialing, the intake, and onboarding, intake of clients, onboarding of employees. And I was like, this doesn't make, like, I'm just going to pull them out and they're going to provide this, like, we're going to optimize this. They're going to provide the service for my companies, but then they're also going to provide this service for other companies, because then I can, you know, have this aspect of my business that's not revenue generating. If I can get it optimized enough, it can become revenue generating. We just can replicate this service for other companies. So that's what we did. You're going to laugh. I don't know if I told you this name when we talked, but I named it because this is literally how I felt about dealing with the back office stuff. I named it OMG, or Origin Management Group. For real. I did. Yeah.
Awesome.
And we had one business, so like a little bit of revenue, right? Other than the service it was providing for my companies. And that was about a year after. I mean, this happened probably like 6 months after, 4 to 6 months after I sold the Virginia location. I built this back office. And then another 6 months later, well, for that entire year after I sold the Virginia location, the family fund that bought it from me, their CFO like would call me weekly or text me weekly or email me. I have a good relationship with him, so I feel like I can say this, but he stalked me for a year, like hardcore. And he wanted my Maryland group. And when we first started talking about it, I was like, look, I can't manage Virginia, but you will not have, over my dead body, are you getting my Maryland team, right? Like, it's not happening. Famous last words. So
Always are.
we really grew like gangbusters. And there was this moment where my husband and I sat down and I was like, my payrolls every 2 weeks are more than I make in a year. Like, this has outstripped our family to such a significant level that it's almost not, it's like so risky, you know. And there were some other things going on personally, and so we decided that it was the right time, and it was a year later. So I called, CFO's name is Todd, called Todd up, and I was like, hey Todd. And so then he was very happy, and so then we started the negotiation process. And that was a really, so they bought into the company, and I was able to maintain control as CEO. I had to run things through Todd, but I got a CFO, which was beautiful because now all of a sudden I had this role that I had to carry that I wasn't trained to carry. And so now what happens is I go into this like 2-year period where it's like the best MBA program ever in finance, because I learned so much. And we went from 2 centers when they bought into my Maryland group. We went from 2 centers to 7 centers in 2 years. So
that's
pretty
awesome.
Significant growth. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
So now you did that over the course of, you say, a couple of years. So you kind of made the sale, made the exit in the sense of ownership, but continued on as to run it as CEO and doing that for a period of time. Did that over a course of 2 years. Now, is that kind of at the transitional period at the end of the 2 years, that time was kind of up, or kind of what made you decide to, kind of, or fully make that exit after the couple of years?
Yeah. So they also, I failed to mention this, but they also bought into the Michigan group. And then my Florida group was carved out, and I rebranded that and created a new company to operate that under. So I'm operating that myself completely separately. And I'm working with them in the Maryland group and the Michigan, and the Michigan group. And then they purchased 2 other companies. So now they had a portfolio of 4, 2 of them were mine, and decided to exit. So I was on board with the exit, although it wouldn't have mattered. I wouldn't have had a choice. That would have been something I had 1 board seat, they had 2. So like I would have been overruled there. And so, yeah, that was the final exit. And even our final exit came with a cash up front and cash at that company's final exit. So there was still like another, was about a year and a half-ish. Yeah, actually it was right out of a year before like all my equity was, I don't hold equity in any companies anymore, any ABA companies.
So now, see, it makes sense. So you do that, I'll say transitional period, or you do that for a period of time, fully make the exit, or they take it over. Now, how did you kind of figure out what you were going to do next, or what that next step was, or where you're going to go from there?
Yeah. So, one of the cool things that I got in kind of our next exit, working with a larger company, actually our four companies coming on doubled them in size. So we were the same size as them. We just doubled them. But I worked on their business development team. And so I had sat on the side of the table as a seller, going through contracts and negotiation several times. And now I had the opportunity to sit on the side of the table as a buyer. And so that was really a cool experience. And I'm grateful for that. So that was kind of that next year. But what I had done before we had exited, so it was probably about 6 months before we exited, is I started this tech company. And the purpose of the tech company was to increase operational efficiency within my own company. But I did create it separately, and then very quickly pivoted that from, no, this isn't just going to be something I'm using. This is going to be something that I'm going to, it's going to be a company that I'm going to take all the way. So that was kind of when I left, that was like the obvious next step. It didn't, tech is so hard. Oh my gosh. And like, if anyone is listening to this who is in the tech world, they're probably dying laughing right now that a clinician thinks ever thought it would be a good idea for her. I don't know the tech world at all, So I honestly spent the first 2 years wasting money and having a quick learning curve. If you're not in the tech world, you don't know. Gosh, there's so much you don't know, but like, you don't just go find coders and they build you an app. It doesn't work that way. That's how I thought it worked.
No, there's and not only that, you have to, you can take an idea, and then it's what is the concept of it, how to do it, and then you find out all the ways that people can break it. You find out you have to have a good user interface. It just a lot of features and functionality isn't always a good thing, in the sense that it's hard to interact with it, or it's hard for people to use it or understand it. And then you have to find the right fit, and then you have to find the right programmer. So those definitely get that there's a lot to do there. So now, so you started, or so you made the exit of the previous business. You started in the, or full effort doing the building the tech company. So like what period of time has that been, and it kind of catches up to a bit of where it's at today?
Yeah, so the tech company started about 3 years ago. We have our MVP, we have businesses in the app, so we're producing revenue. We are not break even, but we are producing revenue. And I am funding it with consulting. So I say I accidentally started a consulting company. It's now intentional. But when I put my, like on LinkedIn, when I put my stop date from the other company, I had probably about 5 or 6 businesses reach out to me immediately and ask if I would be willing to talk with them and help support them. So when I say accidentally, that's what I mean. It really was. And then I started working with these business owners and I was like, oh my gosh, I actually really love this. And so now I've got a community, a separate community of about 140-ish, 150 business owners that and then I have private one-on-one consulting. But all of that money is, it hits my bank account and then it goes into my tech bank account and then it vanishes. So that's kind of my life right now.
Well, that's a lot of times how it starts out. And like I said, I think that, you hit on that people think, oh, it's tech, it's just a software app, it's easy to build, it'll be straightforward, you don't have any hard assets or overhead and makes it easy. And then once you get a build, it's a simple thing to just the money will flow in, and it's certainly far from the truth. So sounds like par for course of getting things up and going and funding it along the way and maintaining and keeping that ownership. So it sounds like a great path to be. So now, as we've kind of reached the present day of the journey, it's always a great time to transition to the 2 questions I always ask at the end of each episode. So we'll jump to those now.
Okay.
So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? What'd you learn from it?
So, I think there are 2. The first one worked out okay for me. So I don't know that I'd classify it as the worst decision I made, but I think it could have gone really poorly. And that is, I didn't look at multiple offers when I sold the first time. Someone pursued me and I wasn't thinking about an exit. I didn't plan for the end of my company because in my naive mind, I'm like, no, I'm just going to do this forever. And so I wasn't really prepared. Someone else kind of was able to come in and sort of write what that should look like for me. Now, I think I negotiated well. I think, could I have gotten a better deal? I'm sure I could have, but I'm not unhappy with the way that the whole thing progressed. I think I had a tremendous opportunity to learn, which is worth a whole lot more than almost anything else. So that's really valuable. But as far as mistakes to avoid, if you own a business and you haven't planned what your exit strategy is, I would say put some thought into that. Have a shell of a idea of what that's going to look like for you. Put some parameters on it, because what you don't want is the first person coming in and defining it for you. So that would be the first. And then along the same lines, and I do think this was a mistake. Now it's hard to rectify, but I was head down grinding like for a decade, like just in the weeds, grinding, building. Now I was able to build to a point where I built myself out of a job. I wasn't like in the day-to-day muck of it, but I was still constantly looking at what's the next thing, what's the next step. So I didn't network. I didn't intentionally network or connect with people or do what we're doing here, right? Like say, hey, world, I have a story, or what's my value here beyond just what I'm doing in the immediate? Could I help someone else with something? Could there be impact beyond this? And so, get that through networking. And I just put 0 effort into networking. And I think that was a massive mistake, because then coming out of that whole stage, I felt like I was so far behind the game, and I haven't met any of the leaders in my space. I don't know any of them, and here I am trying to pivot my career. So now I also have to, this almost speed networking. There was like this pressure to push that faster. So it's hard to do when you're building a company though.
Well, that's what I said. It's always hard. It's kind of like when you're building, there's a lot of things you should be doing when you're building a company. You should be networking, you should be selling, you should be, or getting out of the industry, keeping tabs on what else is going on. And yet all those things. And not only that, you still have to build and run a business. And so, it can get harder, be a pretty good balance to figure out how you do all those things. And sometimes things that you should be doing tend to slip, and it's an easy mistake to make, but a good one to learn from. So definitely a good one to hear. So now we'll jump to the second question I asked, which is, now if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
So I would say to be relentless in all aspects of what you're doing. And I think that I'm really testing this right now for myself with this tech company, because 3 years in, and we just went revenue positive with our MVP like a couple months ago. So I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I wanted to quit and I was on the floor in a ball crying, I can't do this. What was I thinking? Who the hell am I to start a tech company? Like, what in the world is wrong with my brain? But then there was this other side of me that's like, you decided you're going to do this, get up. And I think that's just the way you have to be. Like, no, this is a decision I made. So, and what is required of that is not just the decision, but then once the decision is made, then I think gives you freedom for everything else. And the everything else is, all right, be relentlessly resourceful, relentlessly determined. There's always a solution. There always is. You just have to believe that. If you don't know what it is, you just haven't found it yet, keep looking, or pivot, or pick up the problem and spin it around in your hand and look at it differently. If none of those things are core beliefs that you hold, I think you hit hard places. And I think that's why so many people aren't entrepreneurs. I think that's why the success rate for new businesses is so low, because people get to this point and they're just like, oh, I can't do this.
No, I
think that you can't if you decide you can't, but you actually could if you decided you could.
No, I think that's a great point. I said it is one where it's interesting, because I think a lot of people hit that point and they just say, okay, never mind, I'm done, or I give up. And, and right. I think that's the point where it can often be the turning point between those that can make a go of it or be successful, and those that, go back to what they comfortable with or what they know. So I think that's a great piece of advice, a great takeaway. Well, now as we wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Sure. So LinkedIn, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. It's just Erica Kinnebrew, ErikaKinnebrew. Or email. And again, Erica@abaengine.com. But I would say those are the two best places to reach me.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, connect, support a great business. If nothing else, make a new best friend. So with that, thank you again, Erica, for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners that are out there, if you have your own journey to share and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners, make sure to click share, subscribe, and leave us a review. Really helps us to share these journeys with even more startups and small businesses to help them along their journey to success. And on that note, if along your journey you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else with your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Erica, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Awesome. Thanks so